On July 20th, 1969, two men stepped onto another world, or so we were told.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
A single sentence echoed through living rooms and history books alike. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. It was the moment humanity was supposed to have broken the impossible. As the world celebrated the first ever moon landing, a very different story was beginning to take shape. A shadowy narrative whispered in hushed conversations and late-night radio shows. A theory claiming that the most iconic achievement in human history might not have happened the way we think. For decades, millions of people have asked the chilling question: did we really land on the moon? When a nation is desperate to win, people start wondering if the victory was crafted instead of earned through blood, sweat, and tears. They start to ask whether the Apollo team really landed on the moon or fooled millions of people on live television. But where does one get the idea that the moon landing was faked? Well, it all starts with one photograph that made the whole world suspicious. What you're about to see next will challenge everything you thought you knew about the moon landing. So, buckle up for an adventure. The iconic moon landing photograph went viral in the 1970s, and for a few good reasons. While many people applauded the efforts of NASA, some questioned their legitimacy with logic. In the picture, a few logical questions can completely change the narrative of the story. For example, there are no visible stars in the background, even though outer space is filled with millions and billions of stars, planets, and galaxies that can't be missed on the moon. The US flag is waving in the wind as if it were on a beach. But wait, there's no wind on the moon now, is there? So why does the flag wave so effortlessly? The third conspiracy points to the footprints on the surface of the moon when the size of the boots doesn't match the footprint at all. Do any of you have a logical explanation for these three clues? Comment below your thoughts. But before discussing more about the conspiracy, let's look at the events that led to the space race anyway. The reason this conspiracy refuses to die is rooted in the world that existed long before Apollo 11 touched down. As we step away from the moon landing, we enter an era defined by suspicion, rivalry, and fear. The Cold War. Yeah, it wasn't just a political standoff, it was a psychological battle waged on television screens and in newspaper headlines. Every breakthrough mattered, every victory was a weapon, a claim for dominance. And the United States desperately needed a win that proved it was ahead of the Soviet Union in the race for the future.
Before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
This was a time when governments operated behind walls of silence. Classified files were common, secret missions were routine, and ordinary people knew far less about what their leaders were doing. When citizens live in a world built in sealed envelopes and blacked out documents, distrust becomes the natural response. So, when NASA announced the success of Apollo 11, many cheered, but there were some people who paused and observed the grainy space photos to find hints of master craftsmanship in them. The pressure of the space race was enormous. The Soviet Union had already launched an artificial space satellite called Sputnik on October 4th, 1957. What's more is that the Soviets even sent the first man into space, Yuri Gagarin, in April of 1961. This wasn't the first time they had humiliated American efforts. The narrative was simple: whoever reached the moon first would claim technological supremacy. In that climate, it is not hard to imagine why some people believed the stakes were high enough for drastic measures, or should we say craftic measures. Now that we understand the immense pressure behind the American government, it makes it easy to understand how the conspiracy exploded. And what fueled the fire wasn't a fake image or video, it was NASA's officially released images and videos. The tiny details that millions of people have paused, zoomed, argued over, and circled and read for more than 50 years. These so-called problems became the heartbeat of the theory, each one adding a new layer of doubt. If we take a closer look at the footage, then the flag being hoisted on the surface of the moon is clearly being caught in a breeze, when there is no wind or atmosphere to move the fabric. Conspiracy theorists point to this as the ultimate giveaway, claiming it behaves exactly like a prop on a studio set. Yet the more you watch, the stranger it becomes. The movement is subtle, inconsistent, and seems to vibrate rather than flow. Apart from the brazen pitch-black sky, observers noted something even more shocking: shadows. On the moon, the sun is the only major light source, so shadows should all fall in the same direction, yet in many photos, the angles appear inconsistent. Some objects look lit from the side, others from above, and certain details seem too bright to be illuminated by sunlight alone. To many, this looks exactly like the effect of multiple studio lights. And the final claim comes as a surprise, but it may be one of the most obvious ones. It's the photographs themselves. Nearly every shot is perfectly framed. Astronauts centered, horizon crisp, equipment captured with artistic precision. All of this taken while wearing bulky gloves, in hostile conditions, with limited visibility and the fact that none of the astronauts were photographers. It raises a simple question. Were these the best photographers in history, or were the photos staged under controlled conditions? These doubts built the foundation of the conspiracy. But here's where the story takes a wild turn with an explanation that could boggle most minds on the planet. The Hollywood theory. If the doubts around the footage were the spark, the Hollywood theory was the explosion. As people rewound the Apollo clips and circled strange shadows in red ink, another idea began circulating, one that felt almost too outrageous to say out loud. What if NASA didn't just fake the moon landing? What if they hired Hollywood to do it? Sounds like a logical explanation if you think about how famous space movies were at that time, with movies like Destination Moon and First Men in the Moon making big waves before the mission. The visual comparisons were irresistible. Old Hollywood sets from the 1960s looked eerily similar to the lunar surface when lit correctly. Cinematic legends like Stanley Kubrick were pioneering new camera techniques, especially after directing 2001: A Space Odyssey. A film that stunned audiences with space visuals so realistic, people genuinely wondered how he shot them. His movie, 2001, released in 1968, just 1 year before the Apollo 11 mission, absolutely shocked the viewers since the world wasn't ready for such high-level cinematography. And from that moment, a myth was born. The idea that Kubrick himself was secretly commissioned by NASA to film a fake moon landing on a soundstage. Conspiracy theories pointed at everything: the lighting, the shadows, the way the dust behaved. Even Kubrick's own films. They claimed his creative genius could mimic lunar lighting using large controlled lamps that produced the same harsh directional shadows seen in Apollo photos. They even argued that the slow, drifting movements of the astronauts resembled wire work often used in films to simulate weightlessness. This idea was effortlessly explained in the recent 2024 movie, Fly Me to the Moon. And what may come as even more of a shock is that Kubrick himself exposed NASA before he died and explained what he regretted most in life.
Moon landings all were fake, and I was the person who filmed it.
It sounds insane until you hear what NASA insiders claimed years later. Engineers admitted that NASA did consult filmmakers in the 1960s to learn how to document missions, how to light scenes in low gravity, and how to operate cameras in extreme conditions. The officials admitted that it wasn't to fake anything, but to capture history in the making. And here is the part that pulls the curtain back even further, because the next chapter of this story does not come from conspiracy theorists, it comes from scientists. History has taught us a valuable lesson. If there are conspiracies, then there are bound to be some explanations from the officials. For every bold claim, scientists have stepped forward with explanations that slice through the mystery like a scalpel. And yet, a few anomalies still linger, fueling the debate instead of ending it. This is where believers and skeptics collide. Take the famous moving flag. At first glance, it looks impossible, a flutter in a world with no air. But physicists point out a simple truth. In low gravity, with no atmosphere to slow motion, any vibration lasts longer. When the astronauts twisted the pole into the ground, the fabric kept its momentum. It did not wave, it trembled. Then there is the starless sky. Conspiracy theorists call it the ultimate mistake, but photographic experts explain that the cameras were set to capture the bright lunar surface and the astronaut suits. Stars, being far dimmer, were essentially drowned out by the exposure settings. It happens even today when bright foregrounds erase distant starlight. The shadow controversy is perhaps the most dramatic. Some shadows appear to diverge, others look mismatched. But lunar scientists reveal the answer. The moon's terrain is uneven. A small slope or dip can bend shadows in strange ways, making them look inconsistent even though the sun was the single light source. Yet even with these explanations, a few mysteries still stir debate. Certain reflections in the astronauts' visors seem to show shapes no expert has confidently identified. Some rocks appear to have markings that look, at least to conspiracy believers, suspiciously like studio labels. And a handful of photographs contain odd lighting flares that scientists are still analyzing decades later. Amidst the bold theories, here's another one that seems logical enough. If you travel to the end of the Earth, then there is bound to be some disruption in the communication. It happens with cell phones, TV, and all the devices that exist even today. But how could the astronauts on the moon broadcast an entire moon landing without disruption and distortion? Well, that's a question that has remained unanswered even to this day. For all the theories, all the red circles, all the whispers of Hollywood sets and secret sound stages, there is a side of the story that hits with undeniable force. The evidence that humanity really did leave Earth and walk on the moon is not subtle, it is bold, physical, and still active today. The strongest proof is silent, sitting on the lunar surface this very moment. Retroreflectors. Small panels left by the Apollo astronauts still bounce laser beams back to Earth with perfect precision. Scientists use them daily to measure the distance to the moon. No studio, no trick, no conspiracy could place working instruments on a world nearly 400,000 kilometers away. Then there are the moon rocks, more than 300 kilograms of them. Their chemical structure is unlike anything on Earth, shaped by billions of years without atmosphere, radiation bombardment, and micrometeorite impacts. Geologists have studied them for decades, and their origin is unmistakable. They came from the moon, not a Hollywood prop room. And behind it all stands an army of people. More than 400,000 engineers, scientists, mathematicians, pilots, and technicians worked in Apollo. A hoax of that scale would be the most perfectly executed secret in human history. It would seem that faking the moon landing would be cheaper than hiring this many astronauts on a mission. Yet even with all this proof, one single question remains. Because then comes the part no one talks about. So if the evidence is so overwhelming, why does the conspiracy refuse to die? Because the moon landing didn't unfold in an age of transparency, it happened during the Cold War. A time when governments hid everything from spy missions to scientific breakthroughs behind layers of secrecy. Every classified document added another crack where the doubt could slip in. Then came the cancelled Apollo missions. They were abrupt, unexplained, and never fully addressed. Add to that the infamous revelation that NASA lost the original high-quality tapes of the landing, and suddenly, the story didn't just look incomplete, it looked suspicious. But why would NASA lose the most important tape in the history of the world? Well, some theorists suggest that NASA was facing magnetic tape shortages during that time, so they accidentally used the tapes used in the Apollo mission. Talk about bad luck. And when the internet arrived, the conspiracy was reborn. Forums filled with theories, documentaries stitched clues together, and millions of viewers found themselves questioning a moment once believed to be untouchable. All it took was a missing tape, a classified document there, and suddenly the greatest achievement in human history became the biggest question mark. So, what do you think? Did we really land on the moon in 1969? Comment your thoughts below and subscribe for more content like this.